And we are streaming. All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Mr. Barden. You may have seen some other videos on my channel with some of these topics we're going to be talking about today. I usually live in the bottom corner of the screen here. Uh, so what you've come across here is a teacher's guide to starting up the programming digital media course. I make several videos each year going just through some of the course content for this programming course that I've helped put together. And this series that I'm going to be doing is going to be specifically geared towards the teachers. I have a short little intro kind of explaining this a little bit more, but basically, if you're a teacher for this video, I'll be going over the various course content, some various projects that we do, things like that, and some tips and helpful things that I've kind of come across as I've taught this over the past few years. Uh, so again, if you're not a teacher for this course, you may not find it super useful if you're only a student or if you're just not even taking a similar course. I would recommend check out some of the other videos either on my channel or just throughout YouTube. There are a lot of great resources out there, but again, this is geared specifically for the teachers of this course. If you would like to know more, please leave a comment with any questions you might have down below. If you learn something, please like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube stuff. And with that out of the way, I think we're gonna jump just right into it. So what I have on the screen here is the textbook for this course. Now, it's not technically required that you use this. However, I think it's a very useful resource to have. Um, so there's a link down in the description below for this as well as the web editor, and we'll get to that later. Um, but everything for the course is right here. Um, so just on the main page, it kind of briefly goes through the idea of the course, some of the table of contents. Oh, look, who's that guy? Basically, I'm one of the main people who has kind of put together the textbook in its most recent form. Um, so again, if you have questions about things, let me know. As you're going through this, I am aware that there are various typos and things like that throughout the book. Uh, Long story. Basically, the editor I was using for the text didn't have a great spell check feature, and we are aware of it. We are working to fix it. There's some changes at the time I'm recording this going on the back end of some of these websites. So right now, I can't change it, but it is in the works for future updates. So yes, I know we are fixing it. Uh, but anyways, just a little bit about the course. I could go through and read all of this on the screen, but I won't, just for the sake of your time. But the kind of the short version of the the goal for this course is for students to be able to use basic computer coding in order to create various kinds of art projects. So it could be something visual or audio related. It could be something completely different. But the idea is to give them the skill set to utilize coding to create things, not necessarily for a computer science only purpose, but something more artistically driven. So to do that, we go through some, various bits of graphics and audio processing. We break out some Arduino at the end of the year if there's time. But we kind of spend the most of the fall semester, if you're teaching this for, an entire school year, on just kind of an intro to coding and specifically coding in JavaScript. That will be the language that we're using here. It's pretty straightforward. If you've done other coding languages, it's visually it's kind of similar to C and those kinds of languages. It kind of came out of that tree. It's a little more user friendly than that, but it's different than things like Python, if that's where some of your familiarity or some of your students may be a little more familiar working with. So we have that there. This book is free and open source for anyone who wants to use it. So because I put it together, I don't use it a ton with my classes, but I will refer to it periodically for some of the diagrams or to give them kind of extra reading or practice assignments and things like that. So again, it's a very useful tool, but don't feel like if you're teaching this course, you have to use this book. All right, some of just the basic things. You can get to all the chapters over here on the side. So intro to coding, and here's all of the lessons and things like that. You can kind of navigate through it here if you want. I usually use this sidebar. Uh, but if you look at it, it's kind of laid out again, just like a textbook. A bit of what I'm going to be talking about today is coming from these first few lessons here. But basically, there's embedded code as needed. It'll display things. We could copy code. Use all that kind of stuff. Um, all right here. This is fun because you can edit the code and see it being rendered immediately just on the textbook page. So it's kind of fun. I'm not going to be going through the content of these pages in the video to here today, but that'll be the next one where I start going over some of the content. But these first few pages, pretty useful. I'm going to be going over a lot of the getting started stuff today. Um, but that'll be more once we get into the web editor. Uh, so again, it's pretty straightforward, pretty user friendly. Again, it's all broken up by unit. So you have the intro to coding, graphics, sprites, things like that, sounds, Arduino, the final project, and then additional resources. So this is, if we just go through here, just extra stuff for the various topics. So maybe go look at this book. Here's some images and sounds you can use for your projects, things of that nature. So that could potentially be useful for you when pulling together various assignments. All right, so that's the textbook again. It's pretty straightforward. The other link you'll notice down below in the description will take you right here, and this is the P5 web editor. Um, and actually, let me just go to the main P5 page right here. P5, there we are. So this is technically the main site. And basically, P5 is a coding environment as well as a library for us to use. So it's not going to be pure JavaScript that we are doing. There is this library that we are using as a base to do some of the various functions that we will be using. So as we go through the course, we'll be pulling in other libraries. I mentioned it here. There is Tone and P5 Play for the various other sections, but we won't be adding anything outside of the P5 library for the first unit. But you can check this out. There's a lot of useful stuff here, but the main thing we're going to be focusing on is the web editor, which looks like this by default. The very first thing you're going to want to have your students do is make an account. So you have the option to sign up and log in over here at the top right. So you'll have them sign up. It'll ask for all this stuff. Yes, I know my username's already taken. They do have to provide an email, but it's just a confirmation thing. P5 does not does not send you stuff. If you have school emails, like a Gmail thing, and you can access those, I recommend just logging in with the with Google option. It just kind of makes things easy. Students don't have to remember different logins and things like that. It can just be the one for their school account, if you happen to have that. Otherwise, they'll have to just make their own. I'm gonna go log in because I already have an account. And take it to right here. You'll notice that the page has changed just a little bit. So the obvious one is just the colors. Under the settings, you can change stuff. I like the high contrast. It makes things very easy to see, and the dark kind of just looks better on my eyes. But you can swap it to whatever you prefer. Most of my students like the dark or the high contrast. You can make the font size bigger, smaller. Just depends on your classroom and how you want to set that up. I recommend having the autosave on and the word wrap on. Auto close brackets and quotes, that's a generally useful feature. So basically, whenever you type the first parentheses or quotation mark or bracket, the computer will automatically add the paired up one, so that way you don't have to worry about forgetting that. That being said, when I started using P5, that wasn't a feature, so I still type them all manually, but this is a useful feature right there. Accessibility, I like having line numbers on. Lint warnings, I'm not sure what that one is. And then other accessibility things. Um, if students are suddenly having weird options and things aren't working right, sometimes they may have hit like a keyboard shortcut or something to mess with the accessibility settings. So that, you know, by default, I leave all this off. So if, a student has some of these on, it may look a little weird. Um, okay, so this again is the web editor. There's a lot of useful things here. Just to kind of break them down, this window right here is where the code is going to live, where students will be typing. So you can type in there. Um, Over on the right side of the screen where it says preview is where the code gets rendered. And by default, it's just a gray square. But this is where the code gets rendered. Down below is the console, and you can have your code send messages and values to the console to display. And while your code is running, you can type stuff here. So what if I did a... Actually, if I did background blue. That didn't actually work, but you can type stuff into the console and you can get information and things like that, or you can set values, change things. It can be very useful. It just depends on what you're doing. So that's all of that right there. You can clear it. You can just hide it if you want to get it out of the way. So we have it right there. You run your sketches with the little play button here, and you stop them with the stop button. It's pretty straightforward. Auto refresh can be useful. So normally, whenever you make changes in your code, you have to rerun the code in order to see those changes take effect. If you tick auto refresh, then whenever you stop typing, the code will automatically refresh and just display it. That is very useful for a lot of what we do in this course. However, I'll get to it later. There is a unit on loops that will, if with this checked, you can very easily run into problems, especially as students are still learning. So whether or not you have this on is kind of up to you. I usually keep mine off and then manually restart my code right there. All right, names. So by default, the name for your sketch is random. Um, as much as you can as a teacher, make your students give names to your sketches, because otherwise when you go look through your sketches, which I'll show you that page in a moment, it's just going to be a bunch of random words and adjectives, and you're not going to know what the heck anything is. So you can first thing I will have my students do when they open it up is give the sketch a name. That's the first thing, so that way they can find it later. They can, so they can turn it in. They can get comments. They can go back and work on stuff. You know which one it is without having to click through 7 or 8 different sketches. It's just a kind of a pain in the ass that way. Okay, let's see. The next bit, there's kind of 3 more sections to go through on this page. If you click this triangle, this opens up the sketch file editor. So when we get into images and sounds, this is where we'll be loading in files to use, which is very useful. But we can also work with these files in our sketch. So the sketch.js file, that is the main JavaScript file that we will be typing in for 99.9% of everything we do in this class. Most of the time, you won't even have to go into this side panel. The style.css file, if you're doing things that we do in this class, you will never have to open this file ever. If you do a little bit more with web development, or maybe a student is a bit more familiar with that, this kind of plays with a lot of the appearance of stuff on the web page. So again, for the purposes of this course, we don't get into it, but if you have students who have a lot of experience, this may be something they could explore, so you can change how stuff looks in your sketch, maybe, buttons and sliders and other things. The index.html, again, we don't go a ton into HTML coding for this class, but this is where you can make things that you could then style with the CSS and do things with the JavaScript. Um, but basically, all this is doing by default is telling our code where to find the various libraries. So by default, we have the main P5 library as well as P5's sound library. I'll talk about this a bit more when we get to these relevant units, but this will come back. I will point out here that right now, as I'm recording this video, we're using the P5 version 1.4.0. Um, Generally, they don't make super drastic changes as this updates. Um, but just be aware that if you're watching this significantly down the line from when I'm recording it, you may want to double check what the P5 version is, because if it's, if versions have progressed enough, there may be very drastic changes between what's on my screen right now and what you might be looking at. Um, all right, so another quick tip: if you have an online code editor that you like more, that you want to use, like for example, um, in this textbook, we do a lot of stuff with Codepin because it's very easy to embed the code and the rendering of that code on the textbook. We can go into Codepin right here, and you'll notice this version of P5 is actually a lot older, but it's just a very simple sketch. But you can take the contents of here we are, this HTML file, and you can put that into something um, Codepin here, and you can do coding in other uh, web editors. You don't have to use P5 technically. I recommend just using P5 unless there's a reason you can't, because that's kind of how the course is structured. There's other reasons too, but it's that's kind of the main one. Is that everything is kind of built around you using P5 as a home base. Um, okay, sketch. Okay. I'll come back to some of these things right up here at the top left in a second, but way over here on the top right, you can change your language if you need to. They're continually adding more options. So if you have any students who don't speak English very well, or they have a language they prefer, they can switch to it. You can switch to it. It's kind of up to you. But over here, there's your account page. So one thing to note is that with P5, all of everything you do is technically open source. So it's all on P5 server, and you can look at anyone's sketches, really. Um, you can't override or do anything with those sketches, but you can look at them and access them. Um, so again, that is one thing. So I can pull up all of my sketches, and if I knew your account name, I could pull up all of your sketches. I just change, you type in your account name right there, and boom, um, you can pull it up. So here is every sketch I have ever made on my P5 account. It's all right there. Again, if I scroll down, we'll eventually find one that has a non-descriptive name, Time Patio, um, yeah, some other projects and tests and things like that. But again, it's just like this. And so if you give it a useful name and uh, search it, that's pretty useful. Um, so again, you can have as many sketches as you need, but there is a limit to certain sizes. So under assets right here, this is when we start loading in files to use. This is every file that you'll load in. It could be an image, could be an audio, could be anything else. But you only have 250 megabytes per account. So if your students are loading in a lot of very large files, once it's full, you either have to make a new account or delete the resources from P5 to free up space. So that's one thing to be aware of. The next one is collections, and I actually don't use collections a ton. As you can see, I've got 3 right now. Actually, one of them I started doing, but then just didn't keep up. But what this is essentially multiple sketches all in one folder. So what I really recommend my students do, and I'm probably going to implement this more this upcoming year, is to make a collection for each various project. So that way that you can have the different kind of versions of it all in one spot. Or they know that, oh, hey, we're working on this, this one game project. They're all right here. I can just go to my collection and, here objects and classes. Here's all of these lessons, and boom. So you can find all the stuff. Um, the having the assets and things like that, that's a very useful tool. All right, the last bit over here is this window, which should look pretty familiar. That's part of the reason I put it off to last. Um, so under File, you have the option to make a new file, save, open. You can see some coding examples as well that P5 has made. I'm going to save this sketch, and now we have a few new options. Again, once you have saved it, you'll notice that it'll now say the name of the sketch by your account name, and again, if you click on it, you can see all of your sketches. So that's not something I advertise to my students, but if they find it out, I don't usually keep anything up here that would create a problem with my students having access to it. But just something to be aware of. But under File, we now have the option to duplicate. And what this will do is it's kind of like a save as feature on a note, something like Word. And what it'll do is it will take your code and it will, at that moment, duplicate it into a second file. So you can keep working and branch off and do new things, and you have these two different versions. What I recommend my students do is whenever they turn something in, they duplicate it and turn in that new version. What this will do is create multiple versions. So they have whatever they've turned in, and if they make changes in the other one, it's not going to change what they've turned in. Because again, this is all done by this is all saved on a server, on a cloud. So if they turn something in and make changes to it later, then, that could be an issue potentially with deadlines and stuff, depending on what the project is and how you're setting up your classroom like that. So I have my students duplicate it first and then turn it in. Also, I generally give my students starting codes for various projects. So, take this code and do blank with it. So they can open up your sketch. So again, if I was to give you a link to this sketch, it would, you would get this and it would say blah, 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 imported tapier by M. Barden. So you could do all the stuff you wanted to with it, but you can't save the sketch until you duplicate it. Once you've duplicated it, it makes a copy and saves that to your account, and that is now your sketch. Again, it's all open source, so that's a thing. So duplicate is great. Downloads the text files and stuff for your sketch. I don't really get into that. Opens up your sketch, a specific one from your sketch page. You can add it to a collection. We have all that there. What I skipped over was share. So this is how I have my students turn stuff in. When you click on share, we have a few options. So you can embed this in a web page, kind of like we have here. That's not going to be useful for pretty much anything you do. Full screen is a little bit different. We can just go to that, and it shows just the rendering, not the code. As the teacher, you want to see both. You want to see the code that they type so you can be like, you didn't do this right, or all the stuff was in the assignment. Cool, you're great. You didn't plagiarize stuff. Awesome. That way you can also troubleshoot stuff. The edit link opens up exactly the same thing. It's this same URL that you're editing here. So you can see the rendering on the screen. You can see the code over here. That's great. So what I do is I use Google Classrooms for my class, and I have my students turn in as a comment on their assignment that edit link. So again, you just go to share, and they can copy this link, and that's what they turn into Google Classroom, and then I can see all of their stuff. So again, that's why if they turned it in and then made changes before you could look at it and grade it, again, that may be an issue with how you're running your class, so be aware of that. And that's again why I have them duplicate stuff. A surprising number of my students don't realize they can do it, but I don't go out of my way to tell them that. um, okay, working down, edit, you know, very limited menu, but tidy code, and there's a keyboard command for it. Control or command on a Mac, Shift F, will tidy up all the formatting, so it'll set all of the indentations and everything, and it just makes the code look a lot cleaner and easier to read. So, quick tip is whenever my students don't understand something and they come to me for help, uh, pretty much the first thing I almost always do is tidy the code, so that way that helps me be able to find things a lot faster and give them quicker feedback. Um, so again, tidy code, very useful. Find and replace, pretty self-explanatory. Under Sketch, you can add all the files, all the run, stop. I never use this because the buttons are right here, and you can just add files right, right there, anyways. But you can go right there. Under Help, you can get a list of all of the keyboard shortcuts, and they're all right here. Pretty straightforward. Yeah, here's the some of the accessible stuff, but pretty useful. If you need that. About tells you about P5 and all the examples, all that stuff. If you need to use this, it's great. Another thing though, the one that I use the most is the reference link here, and if you click on this, this will take you to this page right here. And if my students ever don't quite get something, I direct them, either to like another student in the classroom or to this page, if it's relevant. But in here, it's broken up by categories, but you can see it all here. But as you scroll down, this is every single thing in the P5 library. So maybe they don't quite get how a line works. Well, you can go down and find the line function, click on it, and you can see some examples. So here's a line, and it's doing all the stuff. It's all right there. Here's some text descriptor, some the various syntax things that you need. Um, you could do 3D lines if you wanted. Sometimes you'll see relevant functions as well. Um, so again, it's all very useful. You can make changes in this code even if you wanted. You could edit it in an editor, things like that. So again, the reference page is very, very useful. I especially starting out, I always send my students here. Um, exactly how useful though kind of depends on what they need to know and where we go. So like here's a bunch of stuff for if else and functions and all that kind of founding stuff that everything's built off of, and um, other things, events and mouse stuff, anything with touch screens, and it's a whole bunch of things. So um, really good resource to have. Definitely keep it ready, and you can always easily access it. Help, reference, boom, there you go. Okay, so that is everything on the main page and the textbook right there. Uh, I just don't think there's anything else I needed to mention. I don't believe so. Again, I highly recommend that you use this editor. It's very useful. Um, but again, you don't necessarily have to. Oh, I remembered one thing. In terms of hardware that you'll be using for this course, this will be kind of where I ended off. Um, the students really only need a computer with internet access and the accompanying keyboard and mouse or trackpad if it's a laptop. Um, so that's it. And they'll need a modern web browser. Obviously, this works great in Chrome. I'm using a version of Opera right now. It'll work in Safari. Chrome is probably your best bet, though, for using it. I do want to say, though, you don't need a super powerful computer, but if you have the option to, um, try not to have your students use Chromebooks for this course. I mentioned before that some of the loops can cause problems with the code in the web browser with the auto refresh. those problems are worse on Chromebooks, on top of generally, in my experience, the Chromebooks that school boards mass buy for their students are less than mediocre in terms of quality. Because I mean, you gotta, you know, get enough for all your students. No, I get it, I get it. But they aren't great. So you can potentially run out of storage and memory, and that can be a problem. So again, I if you can't avoid it, you can't avoid it. We got to work with it. It'll still work, but I recommend having anything slightly more powerful, because again, you can run into problems having multiple Chrome tabs open with a not very powerful device. And I'll talk about it more when we get to the loop section. But you can run into some potentially very bad problems if your for loop is not properly set up, and you're on a Chromebook. I haven't had a Chromebook recently, but it seems like they were making solutions for that. So it may not be a problem anymore, but the last time I had Chromebooks in my class, those were problems. So I'm going to talk about that when we get there. And I'll keep going. So that's pretty much the end of the video. This wasn't scripted or anything. This is me just talking for 30 minutes. Um, and yes, I'm going to be wrapping it out. If you learned something, found something useful, definitely like, comment, subscribe to all the YouTube stuff. The links to these are down below. Um, and again, look forward to seeing where we'll be going next and what all the students that you'll be teaching will do. My plan for the next video, I pretty much went through everything in some of this page, um, and most of the getting started page. Um, saving stuff, doing all that. Didn't really get into some of the more fine details. So my plan for the next video is to get through probably these first 3 pages of content, just to explain it, give teacher tips, things like that, and we'll go from there. And then I'll have another one for to wrap out this first chapter with variables.